New York Bio is pleased to present Vision Talks from our 2021 annual meeting. This talk is a novel strategy to cure neurological disability into the 22nd century by Dr. Raj Ratan of the Burke Neurological Institute. Dr. Ratan is introduced by Deborah Novick, Westchester County's Director of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. This talk is brought to you by The Catalyst at Westchester County Economic Development.
It is. Hi, good morning. I'm Deborah Novick, as Jennifer said, and thank you so much, Jennifer, for including Westchester County Office of Economic Development in this great annual meeting. I have to admit, it is my own first day back in the city after a long hiatus, and it's really great to be here. So I'm the Director of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Westchester County, and the biosciences is one of our priority sectors in the county, and it's an area that the whole county, not just the government, has been working on deepening for probably 20 or 25 years. Regeneron is clearly one of our largest and most visible, well-known participants in our ecosystem, and they've just committed to a huge expansion which will add about 1,000 jobs to our local ecosystem. But they're really not the only player. You may not realize that we have over 200 different types of entities, just like Jennifer was saying, from all aspects of the ecosystem, from research institutes like Burke, which I'll talk about in a moment, early stage startups and huge companies and supportive service providers. We have over 200 participants in our local ecosystem, which is something we're very proud of. Burke Neurological Institute is really probably one of our gems, possibly the leading research institute that we have in Westchester. And I'm looking very much forward to Dr. Raj Ratan's Vision Talk, which is, I think, patient-centric, just to pick up on something that Jennifer mentioned serendipitously. So just a minute about Raj, and then I'll stop talking. So Dr. Raj Ratan received his Bachelor of Arts in Neuroscience from Amherst College in 1981, and he went on to complete an MD PhD at NYU School of Medicine, and then he went on to do an internship in medicine at the University of Chicago, and was a neurology resident and then chief resident in neurology at Johns Hopkins. In 1996, he moved over to Harvard, and then in 2002, he moved to Burke to direct the Research Institute. He was formally appointed the Winifred Masterson Burke Professor of Neurology and Neuroscience at Weill Medical College in 2004, and he was named an Associate Dean for the Medical College in 2011. And in 2019, Dr. Ratan co-founded NeuroCures New York, a novel clinical trial platform aimed at curing chronic neurological disability. This is funded through the Empire State Development Corporation. And although I don't want to steal Raj's thunder because I think he's going to speak about this, we're very, very proud to have this innovative clinical trials network right in Westchester. And Raj, if you can come up and tell us some more about it.
Well, good morning, everybody. And I wanted to start by thanking Jennifer and Mary and Derek for putting on this great event, and of course, Debbie for including me. As you can see from my bow tie, I'm a classically trained neurologist, but I'm also a neuroscientist, and I've been fortunate enough to be the CEO of the Burke Neurological Institute for the past 19 years. So I think we would all agree that we've learned a tremendous amount from the pandemic. And the first lesson, I think, is that public health is important. Second, that public health is driven by the best science. And third, that we can't really wait till we're in the middle of a pandemic to optimally drive the science that will solve that problem. So I'm here to tell you about another looming epidemic, some that maybe you've experienced personally or have friends who've been afflicted, and that is the epidemic of neurological disability. Now, I'll just give you some statistics. Currently in the United States, there are greater than 7 million Americans who are disabled from stroke, 5.5 million who are disabled from Alzheimer's disease, 5 million disabled from traumatic brain injury, and it's going to get worse. with the aging population and the paradox of progress, our ability to keep patients alive longer after diseases like stroke and spinal cord injury, the current estimates are that by 2050, we're going to be spending $1.4 trillion a year on the two leading causes of disability: stroke, the leading physical cause of disability, and Alzheimer's disease, the leading cognitive cause of disability. And that doesn't begin to touch the personal suffering that is induced by these diseases. We recently had a lecture by a chair of neurology from UC San Diego, and he said to care for the 12 million people with Alzheimer's, we're going to need 36 million people. That is a number greater than the population of the state of California. So I wanted to provide a conceptual framework for you for understanding how we think you should solve the problem. And it involves these three boxes: impairment, handicap, and disability. Now, everybody knows that if you have a stroke on the left side of your body, you're going to be weak on the right side. That's your impairment. And as a result of that impairment, you'll have a disability, maybe not being able to walk across the room. And if you can't walk across the room, if you work behind a desk like I can, it doesn't really affect your ability to work. But if you sell popcorn at Yankee Stadium, and I think for those of us who are Yankees fans, we're happy to see how they're doing, you're never going to go back to work. Now, traditional rehabilitation will help you get across the room by putting you in a wheelchair. And that's fine for somebody who works behind a desk, but if you sell popcorn at Yankee Stadium, that's just not going to work to get you back to work. So we're part of a movement to really start to figure out how can we repair the brain so we can get arms and legs moving again, and really get those people who work under any circumstances to really get back to normal lives. And I don't mean to diminish what is done in rehabilitation, because there will always be a synergy between our attempts to try to repair the brain and current attempts at rehabilitation. So I hope from this short intro, you understand that a commitment to cure neurological disability must require us to repair the brain. And the question is there any evidence that the brain can actually be repaired? I'm going to show you a little video, and I'm going to try to stop it halfway through, but I think it is a very powerful video that should give you indications that the brain can actually be repaired.
Standing up, finding your balance, requesting a stimulation.
Stim on.
Okay, start message sent to implant.
And walking. Apparently, simple actions, but not for David, who has been severely paralyzed for 7 years.
The first time he could really walk, get out of the wheelchair after 7 years of paralysis. So that was a very emotional moment. I will never forget this. This is, I believe, the first time that people who have been paralyzed for several years are now able to walk voluntarily over ground, even outside the laboratory environment. And second, in all our participants, we have seen the recovery of a voluntary control over their paralyzed muscle, despite years of paralysis. And I believe that these two discoveries, these two findings are really unique in spinal cord injury medicine.
These two findings are the results of many years of research. In 2012, Dr. Gregoire Courtine and his team found a way to give paralyzed rats the ability to move again.
And already all the journey to have the paralyzed rat walking again was incredibly complex and long and difficult. And when we thought about it was the right time to translate this finding in animal models into a clinical application, it felt overwhelming.
In a precise surgical procedure, an electrode array is placed below the injury, over the lumbar spinal cord, which contains the neurons that control the leg muscles. The brain delivers signals that activate these muscles, but for paraplegics, this signal is weakened after passing through the lesion. The electrical stimulation therefore serves to amplify the signal. The neurosurgery was performed by Dr. Jocelyn Bloch.
For me, it was not the first time I was doing this kind of procedure, but it was the first time I was doing it in this context and with completely different perspective. And and there was all this team expecting a lot, so it was quite a day I will remember all my life.
I wanted to make sure that the location was optimal to obtain our expected effects. And this was all dependent on these surgical procedures. So you can imagine the amount of stress, scientific and emotion.
A pulse generator with real-time triggering capabilities is placed below the skin and linked to the electrode array. During rehabilitation, an antenna is taped to his stomach on top of the stimulator. Then, they relay the stimulation commands from a computer via an additional wireless antenna.
Basically, there are two systems here. There's a cable-based body weight support robot, which is helping the patients to stand.
Of time, I think what you can see from this video is strategies are being brought to bear that will allow people years after a spinal cord injury to walk again. That was the guy in the first video who was walking with a walker, had not moved for 7 years and now is able to use that on his own. So that strategy costs about $1 million and takes months of time. And so we want to develop a practical strategy that we can apply to the millions of patients who are disabled. And the brain, as you know, is not like the kidney or the liver. In some ways, it's like a computer. You not only have to fix the hardware, but you have to reboot the software. And for those of you who have kids or nieces or nephew, you understand this very well. The child's brain is very plastic. But if you don't educate that plasticity or shape that plasticity with experience, then they don't learn skills. And I give the example of my kids who started playing tennis when they were 4. By the time they were 12, they hadn't gotten much better. And I told my wife, oh, we've spent all this money and they still suck. 2 years later, my daughter was #1 varsity as a freshman and my son equally high on the tennis team. So we wanted to take this idea that you need to fix the hardware and reboot the software and make it a reality. And in Westchester, we've developed robots in collaboration with MIT, which allows us to standardize the way that we shape experience. Patients sit on this robot and they gain, it really reboots the software. The robots also have the added ability to measure outcomes, which takes human bias away from it. And you can actually have one therapist who can manage 4 patients at a time. This is in an article in the New England Journal of Medicine. This was found to be great, but the problem with this approach is it's clinically meaningful, but the effects are small. And so we wanted to know, could we develop a strategy that would allow us to really get a cure? And can our strategy actually reflect a tolerance for failure? So we, along with a group from Rochester, Brad Burke and John Walpow, we came up with the idea that we would set a platform trial. As many of you know, we're moving away from the idea of one drug and one population. We spend all this money to assemble a clinical trial, and then we deconstruct it after we're finished. Let's make a commitment to solving a problem and keep that trial going in perpetuity. And the idea here is to invite companies, invite companies to bring their best phase 2 ready drugs, biologics, stem cells, electroceuticals, combine that with our standard training, reboot, fix the hardware, reboot the software, and get a cure. And the specific plan is to have 6 weeks of robotic training as a base for all the patients who will be involved into the trial, and then layer on top of that different drugs. And the advantage of this is that we can be testing many drugs at the same time with one control group. But also the other thing is you find out which interventions are not only statistically significant, but which ones are the most robust and are likely to succeed as you go into phase 3. So in order to do something like this, it takes a village, and we have relied essentially on a $5 million grant from the Empire State Development Corporation. They understand that government has a vested interest in seeing us cure disability, but it also involves a number of other institutions. The University of Rochester and Burke in Westchester County will be the clinical coordinating centers. The National Center for Adaptive Neurotechnology will be our data coordinating center, and we're working with a company called Clintrex to really create a platform that will go on until we solve this problem. So I want to finish by saying that we think NeuroCures New York, which is the name for our platform, will start with 4 institutions. We expect it to grow throughout the state. And it will, by providing a beacon for patients and for companies, and it will allow us to scale. It's amazing. We have millions of patients who are disabled, and yet we can't get adequately powered trials. It will also accelerate the translation of great basic research. We've learned so much about how to repair the brain, and very little of it is actually getting tested in humans. And finally, it'll provide a therapeutic test of this idea that the brain is in fact different from the kidney or the liver, that you need not only to fix the hardware, but you have to shape that, you have to reboot the software. And if you don't bring those two together in a coherent clinical trial, you're not going to solve the problems of the brain. And I'll stop there. And I don't know if I have time to take questions or what, but thank you.
Thank you to Raj Ratan, Deborah Novick, and our sponsors at The Catalyst at Westchester County Economic Development. This has been a New York Bio Vision Talk.